Thank you. Well, my sincere thanks to the committee and all of you. The invitation, of course. I'm so happy to be here because this is really a Sahavas. The intimacy of give and take of love. I've seen nothing else here. And that's all we're here for. Baba said, when I drop my body, I will live in the hearts of my lovers, and I will go from heart to heart. And that's what I see here. That's what I feel here. Baba also said, I have come to sow the seed of love in your hearts, so that in spite of all superficial diversity, which your life in illusion must experience and endure, the feeling of oneness through love is brought about amongst all the nations, creeds, sects, and castes of the world. Recently in Mandali Hall, Mirzad, Balnatu remarked, sometimes he works more through confusion than clarity. And this gives me the courage to continue. If what I say brings confusion to you, never mind. As a member of an endangered species, a piece of old broken down furniture, not to be equated with those antiques, MeherBaba's Mandali, I would mention another quote from Baba given at the 1958 Sahavas at Myrtle Beach Center. Baba said, though I am the avatar, I am past 60 and can no longer depend upon my memory, like any worldly man past the age of 60. What a divine sense of humor. I trust that as a worldly man well past 60 years, you won't mind my reading some of these remarks. This is a little memory of things long past, of Peg Andy's meeting with the avatar, MeherBaba, on May the 17th, 1952. Baba referred to us as Peg Andy, and though Peg is now silent, she remains as my role model. Excuse me. As they say, of a true Baba disciple. It was through our long marriage that I experienced the meaning of pure love. You do not see her here with me because she ran off with my best friend. But make no mistake, she's here. Peggy first came to know of Baba from a photo published in a Sunday paper. This was in 1932. She removed the article and told Scotty, her mother, someday I'm going to meet this man. And 20 years later, that prophecy came true. And I would like now to tell you a little bit about that first meeting. It was a very hot day, and we were dressed as we would dress for church. I had a coat and tie, and Peggy was dressed in a linen suit. And you ladies know there's not much hotter than that. And we stood outside the barn and waited, a small group of us, possibly a dozen. And I don't know, the apprehension and concern about meeting even a celebrity was not there in my mind and in my heart. I felt I was just waiting. I think if I had come to any realization of what was going to happen, I probably wouldn't have been able to go into the barn. But Margaret Crass came to the door, opened the screen door, I can hear it squeak now, and said, Peggy Muir. And Peggy went round, up the steps and into the barn. This was the only time in our long years that we had ever had an experience of Baba not being together. And I was wondering, what's happening in there with Peggy? Well, what happened, Peggy had mentioned on several occasions that she said, I would be so happy if I thought that I had brought one soul just a little closer to God. So when she went to Baba's chair, he told her, "You have brought many souls to me." Now, she didn't want this as an ego trip. She wanted this was because of her great love for people and for her great love for Baba. And nothing he could have said to her would have pleased her more. Before I knew it, my name was called. Peggy went out the other end of the barn. I went up the steps, the door opened, and I looked. You all have been, most of you I'm sure, have been to the barn, and where that gold-covered high-back chair is there near the fireplace, I saw Baba. And I ran to him. It must have looked silly, running in a building. There's only, I think it's 15 paces, but I couldn't get to him soon enough. Unfortunately, it was one of those very few times that my ego wasn't in charge. I didn't think about who he was or what he was. I just ran to him, and I just grabbed him in my arms. And I remember my right hand was over his left shoulder, and our faces were this close. And I looked into his eyes, and I wish I could describe that. People usually say, "It's just indescribable," and then they proceed to describe it. But I can't describe that feeling. But I looked deeply into his eyes, and I heard Adi say, I didn't know. When I went into the barn, I didn't see anybody that was there. There were people there, but I didn't see anybody but Baba. All the people that I ever had loved was there in one package and more. It was such... See, there I go, trying to describe the indescribable. And as I looked into his eyes, I heard Adi say, "He loves Baba very much." And I started to cry, because that was the first time that I knew that I loved him. And I even thought about getting his sadra wet. Tears were really flowing. And then the next thing, I heard the same voice say, "Baba loves him very much." I think if I had gone totally deaf at that moment, I would have heard everything I wanted to hear. If I had, I would have complained about it. But and then as I continued to look into his eyes, Baba just seemed to disappear. And this is a very difficult thing to try to explain that you might see it. There was a human form, and I knew that person was very old. And that form was sort of wrapped. You know what a hornet's nest looks like, I'm sure. It looks, and is so dry and brittle that if you just touch it, it seems as though it would just go poof, and that would be it. And this, whoever it was encased in that kind of wrapping. And I didn't really see the person, but I was trying to tell that form, "Don't worry, don't be upset. I'm here. I'll take care of everything." And I was concerned that that individual didn't hear me or couldn't understand me, and I was trying so hard to get that across to that person. And the next thing, Baba's face, his eyes came back into view, and then I was excused. I never have understood what that vision, or whatever you want to call it, what it meant. I have ideas, but I better not bring them up because I don't really know. Then I was excused. I went out the beach side of the barn. I don't remember anything else of that whole day. But I had that feeling of relief when I first embraced him that I had when I was just a child and I was lost in my own little town. It was almost dark, summer evening. And I was very frightened because I thought I would never find my way home, and I didn't know where I would sleep or what. And I was crying and very upset. And I came to a church, and I recognized the building because we would travel on a streetcar past that church to go out to the summer park. And I knew I had to go this way to get home. And that was the kind of relief I felt in his arms in the first embrace. It's the nearest thing I can come to tell you about that. So I was going to go into some of the things that happened to us in 56 and 58, but since I heard that we're going to go into those things with a panel tomorrow, I'll save some of those. But there was no conversation in this first meeting. Peggy said nothing to Baba, I said nothing to Baba. It was one of the very few times I had enough sense or enough intuition to keep my mouth shut. There wasn't anything to add to his gift of grace. How can one express the bliss of the embrace of the Avatar? We have known his love on every level to which we could respond. The infinite cannot be limited to the finite. His love is more than our hearts can hold. His compassion beyond imagining. That he is love. The idea that I had met God in human form was overcome by his humanity. The fact that he was God was no concern of mine. I said later, if he had been the garbage man, it wouldn't have made any difference to me. I didn't love him because he was God. I loved him because he was who he is. There were no conditions to be met. There were no qualifications asked for. It was just a total flood and immersion of pure love. I had never imagined any such a feeling before. His love is not ordinary. He doesn't say, I will help you. He says, I will help you. And so, from that point on, over many years, we were in a lot of storms. A lot of them. But with the captain like him, you can go through any storm. Now I would like to go to the 1969 Darshan. Because it was at this meeting in Gurprasad, Pune, that I first began to feel his divinity, his power. And this was, of course, without the form. Prior to that, I'd always been totally satisfied with his humanity. I never needed to relate to him as my God. I knew he was that. I never doubted his avatarhood. My conviction was total, but it was for the most part intellectual. I had not thought of him without form. It's something like the truth that when one we love drops the body, we learn another dimension of our love. It was always there, but always with form. It takes time to really understand that real love doesn't demand a form. Real love is not diminished by the loss of form. To the contrary, it is heightened. Love does not depend upon our eyes, but our hearts. So the physical presence that those young in love demands is a great illusion. We very often deny ourselves the opportunity of great love or friendship when the physical attributes fall short of our requirements. One who really loves is not fooled by the changes that nature creates. What a shame to think of those very different from ourselves as not lovable. It is said that love is blind. It's not so. It's the only real seeing. So we go to Gurprasad, Pune, the first morning of Darshan. Peggy and I stayed at the Turf Club, and we were driven over to Gurprasad in a taxi. And as we got out of the car, we noticed off to our right, facing Gurprasad, there were three young men standing there having a very earnest conversation about something. We had no idea what that conversation involved. But hardly had gotten out of the car, and Mani came around from this side of the building. And as I didn't recognize her at the moment, and her face had a glow to it. It could have just been the sun, but I noticed that there was a lovely, soft, golden glow to her face. She came over to us and embraced Peggy, and then embraced me. Now this embrace I think I can describe to some degree. The first feeling that I had in embracing Mani was the feeling that you have when you hold an infant in your arms. That sweetness, that purity, that innocence. There's nothing like it. There's no other feeling like that. And these sensations came to me in this order without my, again, my ego is not involved here. The next sensation that I felt was that which you feel when you walk along with a little toddler and he or she takes just one finger in your hand, and walks beside you. You feel so great, it makes you feel so happy to this little one walking with you. The next feeling I had was that which a man would have when a 11, 12-year-old little girl comes and jumps up on his lap and looks up at his face and smiles at him with such trust and such love and such, You men know what I'm saying. It's wonderful. I felt that too. And the next thing was the feeling of a sensual feeling. I felt Mani's back and the softness of her dress or sadr, whatever she was wearing. The silkiness of it. And there was a sensual feeling, but no lust. I felt like a young man holding the young lady that he loves. And then the next one was that which you feel when you embrace little Mansari. You don't want to squeeze her. You're afraid you'll break something, And that was the feeling I had during that embrace. And I wanted to tell you about that because it's a very important part of the rest of the story. So then we went in to have our appointment with God. Erich said, "It is 9 o'clock. It is time for your appointment with God." So during that darshan, there were easily as many people in the room as there are here. And Baba's chair was there. And each person in turn, but there were nobody said, "Now, when I tell you, you go up to Baba's chair and you do this or you do that." Nothing like that was said. But if somebody over here got up, nobody else got up. It was amazing. And that person would come all the way down to the chair and either kneel or whatever his heart told him to do. Touch Baba's sandals or whatever. There were many different expressions of love to Baba at that chair that day and other days. It was so beautiful. It was such a sharing, to feel these people when they came up to Baba. It was the most beautiful thing you could imagine. There was no conflict. There was no, everything just was so peaceful and lovely. And everybody was so patient. And we felt such an outpouring of Baba's love that I could never have imagined. And when we finished these meetings and everyone would cry, "Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai," you could feel that building, that Guru Prasad, literally shake with power. That's why I say this was the first time that I had experienced him without the form. And since then. Now we go next morning, I'll take you now to the turf club. Early morning, just about dawn. I awoke and found that my face was wet, my pajama top was wet with tears. I wasn't dreaming anything, and I was surprised. I didn't know why. What's this? What's going on? And I heard a bird song outside, just like our mockingbirds. Beautiful. Just the most beautiful bird song you can imagine. Now these sensations came to me in the same way. I wasn't thinking. I was just laying there enjoying that beautiful song. And it came to me, this is the song to the lovers. This is the beloved song to the lovers. It's sweet, it's clear, it's beautiful. The next sound I heard was the Cathedral Bell. St. Vincent's Cathedral is fairly close to there. I never saw the building, but I heard the bells. And I thought, this is the call to worship. Come to God. Bring your prayers, bring your confessions, whatever. And I thought, the worshipers hear the bells, but do they hear the bird? The next sound I heard was a little engine somewhere, a locomotive engine. It was a small one, it had to be, because it had a little plaintive whistle. I can't imitate it, but it sounded like it was saying, oh, I'm so tired. I'm going to have to work all day pushing those cars around, and I'm weary, and it's going to be hot. And I thought, when I heard that whistle, this is the call to work. Get up, get out of bed, get dressed, do your thing, go to work, earn your bread, feed your family. The workers hear that, but do they hear the bells? Or do they hear the bird? The next sound I heard was a sound of cadence. Somebody was drilling men somewhere nearby. I never saw the drill field, but I knew cadence when I heard it. I thought, this is a call of duty. Do it. Don't think about it. Don't just do it. And those don't hear the call to work, and they don't hear the call to worship, and they don't hear the bells. Only the lovers. In all of this, only the lovers hear the sweet call of the beloved. Now, I'll take you to another place, to Myrtle Beach, about a year and a half later. Peggy and I got to the center, and we met one of these 3 young men that I mentioned earlier. And he came right up to us and he said, after just greeting us, he said, do you know what happened that first day of Darshan? I said, how could we forget it? He said, but I want to tell you what happened. He said, did you notice that 3 of us were standing over here talking? Yes, I said, we noticed you were there. He said, well, what happened is this. He said, we were talking about all the things that we had done, or many of the things that we had done in our life, and we were ashamed to go in for Baba's Darshan. We thought that we weren't worthy, that we weren't clean, that sort of thing. And they weren't going to go in. Imagine, they've traveled halfway around the world for that very purpose. But when Mani came and embraced Peggy and then embraced me, and I always hesitate to say this because it might sound, like I'm bragging or something, but I had nothing to do with it. He said, when we saw you and Mani embrace, he said that was the first time I'd ever seen a man and woman embrace in pure love. And he said, then we just decided to go in. And so I've written this about that. I wanted to explain all that first so that you would have some understanding of what I'm about here. And I call it the Darshan of the 3 young wise men. The wine of God's grace hath no brim. If it appears to have a brim, 'tis the fault of the cup. This is from Rumi, Jalaluddin Rumi. This is not. Baba formed the vines the little foxes could not spoil, nurtured them with care and toil. Some of the yield was sweet as young love's hour, some small, hard, and sour. These he did not choose, sparing them till another hour. The vineyard was the earth, and many climes and soils he used, and some vines in cities grew, and others in the forest fused. Then came a time for harvest. He gave a call anew, come unto me. And like the ancient story true of the wise men 3, how they traveled far, it's told throughout Christendom, no matter where you are. Told to children on the knee, the gifts, baby Jesus, the star. Camels bore the loads, and many days to travel, hot desert sands the roads. God never fails to guide the souls who seek his side, even those who think he's far. Answering their love, he placed for them above the infant's crib a star. If you seek him in love, and to the trust be true, hold fast to his daman, he'll do the same for you. There may not be a star, for he's always where you are. He never comes, he never goes. There's never really two. Now times have changed, as we shall see. The legend of the young men three, a sort of wink and blink and a nod, and God, the goal. The gifts were love-filled hearts. These three flew very far, carrying Cupid's bows and darts to catch the white horse avatar. They in luxury, above the clouds, not camel-borne in pilgrim shrouds, not silently over shifting sands, but roaring over many seas and lands. The appointed hour growing near. The appointment with God, you hear? Bombay, gateway to India. Flying done, the path grows steep near the Ancient One. Onward to Pune, Bethlehem by another name. Landscape Luna, but the game's the same. Guru Prasad, a home of God, where the grapes are to be pressed, where the wine of love flows best. Chosen fruits, ripened in remembrance, matured by love, now to be blessed. Egos stripped from the flesh and pressed, mingled together, mangled together, east and west, west and east, wine for the wedding feast. Now our three friends stopped to count the sins that they had done, thought that they had spent the whole amount on foolishness and fun. Sure, they had failed the Ancient One. The failure was not knowing his compassion, always flowing. Their cups filled with bitter taste, sick with the sour dregs they made but would not waste. They would not throw the bitter gall and take the empty cups to him for cleansing, filling wall to wall with the avataric tide. Then dearest Mani came, brim filled with pure love, embraced us and lit a Duni fire that burned away their thoughts of blame. The incense of forgiveness rose above the ember, consuming the sins they now could not remember. They learned that the chains that bind are a product of the mind, forged by ignorance, locked by habit, worn by sinner and by abbot. And broken by the power of pure love, the chains of steel are gone. The past is past. Time to hurry on. They placed the shoes with the others and entered with no word, like three brothers, close as feathers on a bird. And in that blessed silence, from God to man, came the Darshan. Another incident that I mentioned, this stage arrangement reminded me of all this. Shortly after we returned from the 1969 Darshan, we went to San Francisco, and during the course of that visit we were told that we were supposed to give a talk over at Berkeley. Now this was in 70, early 71, I'm not sure, maybe somebody here was there. Well, you know, a couple of old squares like us, we thought going to Berkeley was like, it was a terrible prospect. We were quite upset because, all the news we got from that part was of unrest and drugs and, the whole scene. The room was very much like the same size. And they had lights there, and they had a microphone here and two chairs, and the people started to come in, and I thought, good Lord, I think some of the original bag ladies were there. At least that's the way we saw it, you see. And boys with big scraggly beards and all kinds of clothes and the whole scene, as they say. And as I sat up on the stage, and I thought, the more I looked around, I thought, what am I going to talk about? I couldn't imagine that I could talk about anything to this group that would, that would have meaning to them. And the minute came closer, and finally the moment of truth. And Peggy was sitting next to me here, and she whispered to me, "Do you see those boys up there in the balcony?" And I looked up, and here were 6 young men sitting in a row. She said, "If there's going to be any trouble, that's where it'll start." And they were sitting up there with this show me, "Oh yeah?" So I had to start. So I introduced Peggy, and she gave a very lovely little short talk. And suddenly I remembered the Darshan. And I believe I started by telling them how much I wished that I could recreate in this building that we were in then, the Darshan, the feeling that we had at the Darshan. And I just started to wing it. And I don't know what I said. Honestly, I was so involved in remembering that Darshan, and I didn't even see them. Well, as all things must come to an end. And when I finished, there was no reaction at all. I didn't know whether they were going to charge us or what. I really didn't know what was going to happen. I wasn't afraid, but so we stepped down from this old stage, just like that. It was 3 steps, I believe. And they started to come to us, and they embraced us, and they thanked us, and there was so much love. I was so amazed, All of a sudden they turned into beauties, Full experience for us. It was another Darshan, really. And I did want to mention that because that was just another after effect of the Darshan. I may mention a few things that happened. I don't know how the time's running. I think that doing fine. Does that mean I'm running out of time?
No, there's plenty of time.
Okay.
40 plus minutes.
Oh, well. Then I'll have to go into some of the things that happened in Myrtle Beach. You know what they say, always leave them laughing. Well, we would wait at the head of the steps near the original kitchen and watch for Baba to come across the lagoon bridge. And somebody would say, "There he is," or "Here he comes." And sure enough, here he would come. He would, as Peter told you, he would stop in the middle or near the middle of the bridge and look out over the lake, and with his sadr blowing in a soft breeze, and he would come up those steps 2 or 3 at a time and get to the top of the steps, and that was when our day started. It was just like that was when the sun and everything else, when the sun came up and everything really started at that point. There was never a time that you'd see him that you weren't filled with excitement and wonder. One day in front of the original kitchen, Baba was walking sort of from the lagoon cabin towards the lake cabin, those of you who are familiar with the center. And this lady came not really running, but hurrying up to him, and 2 of the Manali sort of closed ranks, and she was crying. And she said, "Baba, Baba, how can I love you? I don't even love my own daughter. I can't love my own daughter." And Baba looked at her and smiled and gestured, "Your tears are the proof of your love." One day we were walking down to the barn following Baba, and there was a lady walking about 5 or 6 paces behind him. And she got a little twig in the sandal, stuck in her sandal. And she stopped. And Baba turned round and looked at her and nodded sort of and smiled. And when she took the stick out, he turned and went on. I can't tell you how much that touched me. I realized that here was the most insignificant discomfort that you can think of. She wasn't hurt. She wasn't bleeding or anything. It was just not comfortable. He was aware of that. And if he had not been who he was, he would have ignored it. He knew that she was, this whole situation. But he turned around acknowledged this and waited until she took the stick out and then turned and went. I think that was one of the most convincing things to me of his love for his lovers. And when he does that, how can he ignore your troubles and your problems? Well, of course, you know he doesn't. We went to the lagoon cabin one evening, an interview arranged by Kitty. Peggy and I wanted to know Peggy more than I, because it was her idea really. She said, I won't be satisfied with anyone's answer but Baba's. I must know from him. Is the work we're doing pleasing to him, or is it not? If it is, if not, we don't do it anymore. So Kitty arranged this interview, and this particular evening we went to the lagoon cabin. As I remember, Baba's chair was moved more toward the center of the small room. And so he gestured something to us, what's wrong or what do you want or something, I don't know. And we started to try to tell him this. And as always, when I was very close to him or when I had a real close contact with him, I never could help crying. I just couldn't help it. And if it wasn't that he was who he was, he had never known what I was talking about. Because I was, inarticulate, I was blubbering, but of course he knew. And he listened to our tale. And then he said, what does Ivy say? And I said, she wants us to do it. And he put his right hand on Peggy's head and he put his left hand on my head. And he said, do it together. He put his hands on our heads and then gestured, of course. Do it together. Now, we never took that as an order that he called us to him, want you to do. He was kind enough to let us continue what we had been doing for him. But he knew that we meant it when we said we would just close shop if he wasn't pleased with what we had done. We went to Brook Green Gardens one day. Baba went in the car and we went in a bus. And we got to the gardens. It's changed some now. But we went to a well that was in the center of the entranceway. There was a few small, low steps like this, and then there was a well here. And Peggy and I were standing right by the well. I had my camera ready. At the center it was very difficult to take pictures of Baba because it was either deep shade or, you just get beautiful shot and a woman's straw hat or something would be waving in front of the camera. It was always some kind of a thing. But I thought to myself, when we get down to Brook Green Gardens, there's a beautiful entrance of huge oak trees with the moss hanging from them, a gorgeous lawn, and I could imagine Baba walking down this walk with this sadra blowing, and I thought, I'm going to get the best pictures of Baba that ever happened. So at the entrance now, Baba got out of the car and walked straight over to us, and I'm taking his picture, see, as he comes. And he walked right up to me, and he held his hand out like this, and he sort of tilted his head a little to the side, and he smiled. I'm watching him through the camera, you see. And he just, I always described it as a devilish smile. He turned his head a little to the side and smiled, and then he went on. But in this well, there was 7 million little frogs, and they were just carrying on. Those little peepers, making a real lot of noise. But when Baba walked up to that well, they stopped. Every one. There was not a single frog made a single sound. And when he walked away, they started up again. Yeah, that's true. Okay, so he went on to the entrance, and I'm walking. I'm running across the lawn so that I can get a pan of Baba and the lovers following behind him. Beautiful, beautiful. Well, I got chewed out for walking on the grass. There's a lot of there's a lot of walled gardens in there, and you go from one into the other. It's sort of like a maze. at one point, I was on this side of a wall. Baba's on that side of the wall. He's sitting on the ground, leaning up against a tree that was about so big round. He's sitting there comfortably with legs like this, and he's telling all of them about the Buddha. And I'm back here on the other side of the wall, and I can't hear a thing. The model is interpreting Baba's gestures. I can't hear any of the discussion at all. I was cut off, I cut myself off. All afternoon, I spent getting these great pictures. So after we went home, of course, I sent the film to be processed. They came one afternoon while I was at work, and I got home, this stack of film from the trip. I hurried upstairs. I couldn't wait for Peggy to come home from work. I got the projector out, and I put the film in, and I pulled the blinds, and turned out the lights, and turned it on, and I sat back. I watched some of the other shots that were taken on the center, and everything was fine. I came to the the Brook Green Gardens part, and here comes Baba up to the camera, and he put his hand out, and smiled, and zilch. There was nothing. The screen was total black, just black. There was nothing. I thought, well, it'll come on in a minute. And I sat there. It kept turning and turning and turning, and it went almost to the very end of that whole big thing of film. And the very last thing was some of my friends going into Ivy Deuce's house in Washington. And so, there was nothing wrong with the film or anything, because there were good, clear pictures at the very end, just about maybe 10 seconds of it. This was going to be the epic, the greatest. Sheesh. And I thought, later on, of course, almost all of these things are better understood in retrospect, It's like a rear vision mirror. You can't see where you're going, but you see where you've been. And I thought, what in the world? And then it came to me when I remembered that smile. I thought, that rascal. Then I thought, well, isn't this exactly what happens to us when we do our thing, I wanted these great pictures. I was going to show the world, these movies and all that sort of stuff. And so I got exactly what we get when we do our thing. But the lesson that I learned from that was worth far more than the pictures would have been, as far as I was concerned. One night we were walking down to the barn for a night session. We had several of those, and they were the most exciting. We were walking along the side of the path, the walking path down to the barn, and a car came along, and we had to step up off the little sand road up into this little, sort of a little bank, And as Peggy stepped on that sand, her ankle turned, and I heard it. And she said she had hurt her ankle, but she walked the rest of the way to the barn, sat through that whole maybe 2-hour session, and never said a word. But when we went to leave the barn, she couldn't put any weight on it or anything. So we took her from the barn, we put her in the car, and took her to the lagoon cabin where Baba was holding court. And we took her lifted her into the lagoon cabin. And there again, Baba asked something about what's the problem, something like that. And somebody said, Peggy has turned her ankle and it's very painful. And Peggy's sitting sitting on the floor, and somehow she had her leg toward Baba. He's sitting on his chair. And Baba said, where does it hurt the most? And Peggy put her finger right on the ankle bone where she felt it was the most damaged. And Baba reached down and put his hand over her ankle.
and it never hurt again. She walked out of there and was perfectly all right. She never had any, anything but a memory from that. So I always said he doesn't perform miracles because to him there are no miracles. Whatever he does is natural and ordinary to him to do, but not to us. To us they're miracles, and that to me was one of them. See, I must tell you this before time runs out. The last time that we had Baba, that we were in Baba's presence, I should say, was at the airport in Wilmington, North Carolina. We drove up there, I think it's about 80 miles. And let's see if I can describe it. We were in this huge room, maybe about this size. Baba was sitting, let's say Baba was sitting over here on a stone bench. We were all out as you are, sort of in a semicircle, just looking at him, just loving him, just drinking in that beauty. And after a while, he stood up and went over this way and went into the men's room, which was marked colored. And I don't know why. I really didn't think about it, but I noticed it. Then he came out of the men's room and went over to that side and sat on a stone bench over there. And Peggy and I were standing at the rear of the group. Baba was to our left. And suddenly we heard somebody say, "Peg Andy," and we looked around and here, I forget which one of the Monley it was, motioned for us to come to Baba. So we hurried over to him, and I really don't know how we did, but I know we didn't stand, upright. We didn't stand straight up and before him. I know we didn't kneel, but I can't remember what we did do, but I know we were, we lowered ourselves. And because Baba clenched his fists and held them very close to our faces and looked into our eyes and said, or, the Monley said, "Hold fast to my daman." You could see the white knuckles, "Hold fast to my daman with both hands." And then he would go over to Peggy, right up to her face, and then back to me. "Hold fast to my daman with both hands, no matter what happens." And another couple times, and then we were excused. And very shortly after that, Baba went out to the tarmac to go into the plane to leave us. And those little steps, those little metal stairways that they put up to the plane in small airports so you can get into the plane, you see. Well, we were standing just at the foot of those stairs. And when Baba came over and started to ascend the staircase, so to speak, to get into the plane, I reached and took hold of his sadra, the hem of his sadra, and I held on to it as long as I could without, tugging on it. And that was my last touch of Baba. And then he got into the plane, they taxied down to the end of the field, and they revved the engines, and then they raced up the field, and we saw Baba at the window. He's waving to us like this, and off he went into the clouds. I guess this has kind of been a mixed-up thing I've been giving you, but there were many years that followed all of that. But our relationship, Peg Andy, was really my Baba life. She was my link to Baba. And it was a very strange way that we met. It couldn't have been coincidence. I wonder if anybody wants to tell that. I was on a 72-hour Liberty from Norfolk. I was in the Seabees. And when I got to Washington, I thought I'd look up a shipmate of mine, a buddy of mine. He managed a little club called International Club downtown. And I thought I'd find him and we'd have a few drinks and see what would happen. So I went to this little club, and he wasn't there. And some of the people that had been his employees said, "Oh, he'd probably gone up to the 400 Club." I'd never heard of that place. But it was very close by, so I went up there. And I stepped into this. It was just a makeshift. It was somebody put something together to make a few bucks, sell some drinks. And so I looked around and didn't see Jim, my friend. But a lady was sitting at a round table over here with about maybe 8 or 10 young ladies. This woman was middle-aged. And she called to me, "Sailor, come over." So I went over to her and she said, "Are you in the CBs?" And she saw my, shoulder patch. I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "2nd Battalion?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Well, my son's in the 1st Battalion, and I don't know where he is, and I'm worried sick. I don't have any idea what's going on." Well, I had been in the 1st Battalion, and one day before they shipped out, I was taken out of it. And they were forming the nucleus of the 2nd Battalion, so I knew where he'd gone. So I told her, I said, "You have nothing to worry about. He's in Funafuti in American Samoa. There's no battle action within 1,000 miles. The only thing could happen, he could fall out of a truck or get sick or something, but that's about it." Well, she was so happy to hear that I had to sit down and have a drink with them. I had about half finished the drink, and I felt a tapping on my shoulder. And I looked up, and here's a man standing looking down at me, and he said, "Would you do me a favor?" I said, "Sure." People were really great during the war. There was a real, people were very kind. So I said, "Sure, if I can. What is it?" He said, "Well, I'd like you to sit with my wife." He said, "I want to dance with the lady in our party, and I don't want to leave my wife sitting over there alone. And would you sit with her while I dance?" Well, I said, "Sure, why not?" So I walked over to where this lady was sitting, and she was sitting on sort of a bench with her back to the wall, a table in front of her. And instead of sitting on the opposite side of the table where I couldn't see anything in the room, I just went around and sat beside her on this side of her. She had a large black straw hat on that was sort of, lacquered, shiny black straw. And we started to talk. And I was looking at her, and I really liked what I saw, And I don't know why in the world I said it, because here's a married woman, she's pregnant, But I thought, well, knowing that, she'll know that I'm not, saying anything offensive or anything that she would resent or anything that would be disrespectful. And all of a sudden I heard myself say, "You're the most charming person I've ever met." I was surprised myself. I wouldn't have had the guts to say it, It just popped out. So the next surprise was I found I'm asking for her telephone number. Isn't that crazy? And the next one was she told me. So we talked a little bit longer. And I left. And some months later I got back to Washington and called her. It was Peggy. She was not married. She was not pregnant. This smart character, I think, told me that for insurance, you see. He felt that if I felt that she was married to him and was pregnant, being a sailor that he had never seen before, that I'd at least use some discretion and treat her with respect, which I did. Now that I had been to Washington at that particular time, that I couldn't find my buddy, that, was this coincidence? Well, if it was the happiest coincidence of my life. I don't know, I'm just about run dry for now. Anything you want to ask?
Could you tell us about the last time you saw Baba at Baba's house in Myrtle Beach?
Oh. Well, the last time I saw him actually at his house, in the house.
I was thinking by the back step. I remember being at Myrtle Beach and you telling me.
You mean at the Men's Day?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that was the last time I saw him at the house, really. Well, that afternoon it so happened that Baba was coming toward the living room, coming this way, and I was coming this way, and we met at the intersection. And I stepped back, and Baba motioned for me to go ahead, well, all my manners and my sense of propriety wouldn't let me, and I didn't move right away. But then I realized that I must do it immediately. So I stepped in front of him. I felt a little bit, a little funny about that. That was at the men's day. We went outside, and Baba sat in a wicker chairs, I remember, and gave the ladus, your little sweets, to all of us for prasad. And he had so much fun with us. This was one of the times he played one of those games, he'd look over here and throw it over here. But at the end of that session, he told us all to line up over here. He was sitting here, of course. He said that we were all to line up and come by and kiss him and go. Oh, man. But I think what I want you to really remember about this is that those of you who did not have that blessed privilege of embracing him, looking into his eyes, as I did at Jane's house when Adi gave a talk one time. We were a little bit late, and the whole crowd was in Jane's living room, was packed. And Adi was sitting here looking toward the crowd, and we just got there in time. We're sitting here, you see. Adi began his talk, and he would look over at us every once in a while, and I felt he's just acknowledging the fact that we were there and including us in with the rest. But he would look over another time, and a little bit longer this time, and this kept going on. And I've always had been fascinated with Adi's eyes. He had the most unusual eyes I think I've ever seen. Unusual. And I was sitting there just looking intently at Adi's eyes, and suddenly Adi was not there. But I saw Baba's eyes very clearly, and Baba appeared to be looking through a hole, a rectangular hole in a thick oaken door. And he was just looking through that door at me. And then that disappeared. So after the talk, which was really wonderful, we were driving to the motel. We stayed in the motels at those days because a lot of the youngsters that came to the center just couldn't afford to go to motels, so we figured that was the least we could do So we were driving back to the motel, and Peggy said, "I want to tell you something." I said, wait a minute, let me tell you, like two little kids that found a frog or something. So I insisted I tell her first, so I told her what I had seen. And at that same time, Peggy saw Baba standing there in full form. And when we told Adi about that the next morning, he was so thrilled, he was so excited. Yeah. The only other time I think either of us saw Baba was in New York some years before that. We were in Ivy's apartment in New York, and it was a studio apartment, something with a real great high ceiling and a balcony around this side. We're sitting there, I don't know why, we were waiting for something. And Peggy said, "Did you see that?" I said, "What?" She said, "Did you see that man walk across the balcony and went into that door over there?" I said, "No, I didn't see him." She said, "I'm watching to see if he comes out again." She said, "He had a long white robe on." He didn't reappear, but I'm sure it was Baba. Yes, dear.
Two things. Can you tell about when you first heard about Baba until you met him? And then you said Peggy asked about some work, if it was pleasing to Baba. What was the work?
We were Sufi preceptors. And we worked at that for about 30 years. I didn't want to get into that. I don't mind your asking the question. Gosh.
Thank you very much.
Well, when I thought about coming here and about talking to all of you, I felt I was going to be as nervous as a hooker at the Vatican, As a friend, A friend of mine from Texas used to say, I'm as nervous as a pregnant fox in the forest fire. But I didn't feel that way because I knew that no matter how much I botched it, you wouldn't mind too much. And I felt so much all of your love since I've been here. And I wanted to share some of these things with you. And what I really am anxious to do is to get to my next talk, which will be on forgiveness. So I thank you for your patience. Yes, Hugh.
Can you talk about some of the things you mentioned at the men's meeting?
Mentioned what?
At the men's meeting on Monday?
Oh, no. That was for the men. The women know all those things. You know, the best way to handle something like that, you know, in case you need it, you say to the person, will you forgive me for not answering that question? Okay? And he says yes. And I said, then I forgive you for asking it. And he said, as pretending that he could answer any question, is there anything else that you'd like to ask me about? How's that for gall? Well, again, I thank you all for bringing me here. Very, very much.